NBA fans must know about how strictly the league follows the rules, and we totally appreciate these steps. Sometimes NBA players get themselves in trouble by going against the rules, and throughout the history of the NBA, some players got suspended at their peak times. In this video, we will state some of the famous NBA suspensions in past years. Let's get to it. First up, we're talking about the drug violation and Wilson-Chandler suspension. Like any other sports league, the NBA also has some strict rules and regulations when it comes to the use of drugs. According to the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, the players who are tested positive for the use of performance-enhancing drugs can get suspended for 20 to 25 games, and this suspension can even go up to 55 games according to the circumstances. Back in 2019, Brooklyn Nets' Wilson Chandler was suspended for 25 games after the player was caught violating the NBA's anti-drug program. According to the NBA spokesman, Chandler was tested positive for a growth hormone-releasing peptide called ipamorelin. Chandler, then 32, had signed a one-year contract with the Brooklyn Nets for $2.6 million. Not just that, Chandler also had an outstanding average of 6 points and 4.2 rebounds in 51 games. There's more. In 2007, the 6'9" veteran had spent around 7 seasons with the Denver Nuggets. We can say it was the wrong time for Chandler to get suspended for a drug violation, as the player should have been making headlines with more success instead of getting penalized by the NBA. Next up is the suspension of JaKarr Sampson. JaKarr Sampson, who is mostly known for his near 7-foot wingspan and speed, started his NBA career as a player in 2014, and right now, he's one of the more famous names in the NBA. However, earlier this year in April, the NBA handed down a suspension to the Indiana Pacer. Sampson was suspended for headbutting another player while fighting for rebounding position. The incident occurred between the Indiana Pacers and the San Antonio Spurs when the Pacer Sampson and Spurs Patty Mills got into a physical fight. Sampson didn't only shove Mills, but then he escalated the incident by headbutting him. As a result of this fight, Rudy Gay stepped in and shoved Sampson. In the end, Sampson got a 1-game suspension without pay, while Patty Mills and Rudy Gay were fined $25,000 and $20,000 respectively. During the fight, Sampson got a technical foul, a personal foul, and an ejection for headbutting Patty Mills. The suspension could have been avoided if Sampson had controlled his anger a bit. Anyways, the Pacers couldn't win the game either, and the San Antonio Spurs won 109-94. Now LeBron James and Isaiah Stewart suspension. Last week, LeBron James and Isaiah Stewart got into an ugly confrontation during the Sunday game between the Lakers and Pistons. During the third quarter of the game, James and Stewart were seen fighting for position on a free throw. As soon as the players came into contact, their arms got intertwined, and James was seen swinging his elbow that hit Stewart's face. Soon after, fans saw Stewart have blood flowing from right above his eye. We understand that James didn't do this willingly, as he himself figured it out later after watching blood flowing on Stewart's face. After the realization, the player also tried to defuse the situation. As soon as the other players realized the situation, everyone along with coaches, referees, and security stepped in to keep the two players away from each other. After a few minutes, everyone swayed Stewart out of the court. According to Detroit Pistons coach Dwayne Casey, Stewart had to get 8 stitches for the wound, and he also said that Stewart didn't deserve a suspension for his reaction after the incident. Both LeBron and Stewart were suspended for 1 game, while Stewart was also fined $45,000. It's also worth mentioning that it's the first time for LeBron to get a suspension. He has been penalized before, but never got a suspension in his career until now. Next, Jodie Meeks' suspension for violating the anti-drug program. The sharpshooting guard Jodie Meeks had a clean slate until his suspension in 2018. Meeks had averaged 37.3% shooting and had a season where he rose up to 40%. Meeks has been a role player for major teams like the Lakers, 76ers, and Pistons throughout his career. With such a strong career, fans weren't expecting Meeks to go downhill all of a sudden. The NBA star was suspended for 25 games as he was caught violating the anti-drug program of the NBA. He tested positive for pertaining growth hormones. However, the player kept insisting that he didn't do anything that would cause him a suspension knowingly. Anyways, the player couldn't provide anything to prove his statement and got a 25-game suspension. However, Meeks didn't have to complete his whole suspension as he got traded and eventually back into the game in 2019. Now we have Stephen Jackson's 30-game suspension. In 2004, Stephen Jackson was giving a 30-game suspension after he backed up Ron Artest in an insanity fest. Jackson was always close to his teammates, and he even confessed on several occasions that he'd even go to war for his teammates. When Ron Artest got struck among his fans, Jackson jumped in to get him out of there. However, the NBA didn't like this whole loyalty thing. According to the NBA, whatever was the situation, it was wrong for Jackson to run into a crowd and attack the fans. This incident and the extremely long suspension actually ruined Stephen Jackson's career and hurt the team's performance as well. The matter was also covered in a documentary called Untold: Malice at the Palace. As fans, we believe, even if the NBA had to suspend Jackson for his actions, it shouldn't have been such a long one. Up next, O.J. Mayo suspension, the career-ending suspension. On July 1st, 2016, the NBA announced that Milwaukee Bucks player O.J. Mayo wouldn't be playing any game for 2 years. According to the official notice notice by the NBA, O.J. Mayo had reportedly violated the anti-drug terms of the NBA. However, any other details were not shared. Even before this 2-year suspension, Mayo has had controversies, and the NBA was already keeping an eye on him. For example, back in 2011, Mayo was suspended for 10 games after he was caught using performance-enhancing drugs. Before his career-ending suspension, Mayo had been a part of 3 teams, including the Dallas Mavericks, Memphis Grizzlies, and Milwaukee Bucks. He averaged a total of 13.8 points and 3.1 rebounds for each game. After the 2-year suspension ended, O.J. Mayo did reapply for reinstatement. However, no NBA team was ready to give him a chance, and that's how Mayo's possibly bright future went dark with this suspension. He could have been a great prospect in the NBA, but the anti-drug terms violation ended up finishing his basketball career for good. So, do NBA players get paid when suspended? According to the available information, the answer to this question can never be a yes or no. The NBA may or may not pay its players when suspended or in some other lockout situation. It all depends upon the circumstances. For example, during the pandemic, all players were paid full salaries until May. After that, the NBA held 25% of each player's salary until the games were back to normal. For a disaster or any incident, the league has a force majeure clause in every player's contract, meaning the league has the right to withhold a certain percentage of a player's annual salary if needed. However, if a player is suspended, he isn't paid anything until the suspension ends. This sounds about right because the suspension is a punishment and not a holiday leave. Lastly, if a player is fined, a percentage of that fine money goes into the NBA Foundation and charity. What extra rules do NBA players have to follow due to COVID-19? As the COVID-19 hit, the NBA had to put a pause to its new season. However, after much wait, when the league somehow managed to resume the gameplay, a set of new rules were also announced. According to these rules, the NBA players can't be without a mask while they are anywhere in the 6-feet boundary of literally anyone. Not just that, the players can't use the bathrooms at any arena they play a game at. The rules are not just for the games, but some of them apply off the court as well, as they restrict the players in terms of their personal meetings and any other time they spend with other players when not playing. For example, teammates cannot spend time in one another's rooms. There's more. The COVID-19 rules discourage the physical contact between the players when on court. For example, fist bumps, high fives, or hugs. While the NBA is trying to keep the players and staff safe from COVID-19, some guidelines are just funny for the fans. For example, the guideline for the players passing the time by playing cards states that every time they use a deck of cards, it must be disposed of later. They also promise to provide a sufficient number of decks to the players. Not just that, the NBA is also operating an anonymous hotline, so if any fan watches any of the NBA players going off rail, they can call the NBA and tell on that player immediately. It seems like the NBA is snitching, said one Twitter user. The NBA has to make the players follow the rules in order to keep their team's reputations, so we don't see anything wrong with announcing punishments for those who don't seem to care. With all of this, it's time to say goodbye. Hey, we'll be back with more such videos, so keep watching and keep supporting. Adios!